Hello and good afternoon, CSI157 Section 841 students at Anne Arundel Community College for the spring 2014 semester. What I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to recreate the topology that's in the Cisco Introduction to Networking text, and it's on page number 310, and it's the network with remote routers scenario. And so we're simply going to walk through this, and we're going to use a couple of different routers. So we're going to use the 2911, and we'll use two of those to serve as the routers, and we'll move those a little higher up here. Now, one of the things we're going to want to do is we're definitely going to want to add some interfaces to these. So if I double click on this router here, you can see that it looks like the green power light is on. So if I were to try to add a serial interface card, I should get an error message that says cannot add a module when the power is on. And this is true. You don't want to add modules into the routers while the power is on. So we'll turn the power off, and now I'm going to come grab the WAN interface card that will have two interfaces on it. I'm also going to grab an HWIC 4ESW, which is basically a switch module that will give me 4 fast Ethernet ports. And so then we'll go ahead and leave it at that. And there's also some gigabit interfaces on here as well. I believe we have gig 01 and 00. So let me go ahead and power this guy back on. So we'll power this router back on. If we come over to the CLI, you can see that it's actually loading the image. And we're running version 15.1 4M. All right, and we do not want to enter or continue with the configuration dialog. All right, so now I'm going to come over to router 2. As you can see, I've got 3 gigabit Ethernet interfaces, but we're going to add in some cards. So again, I'm going to power the router down just by clicking on the power button. I'm going to add in the 2 serial interface card, right? I'm going to add in 4 fast Ethernet ports, and again, those are WAN interface cards that have been added in. And now I'll power the router back on. We can come over to the CLI, and we'll actually get to see the router boot here. And remember that in Packet Tracer, the booting sequence is much shorter than if you were to try to actually boot a regular 2911, the actual physical router itself. And so we'll go from user config mode into our user exec mode into privilege exec mode, right? And we're going to come back here. So now we have the 2 routers, and in looking at the drawing on the diagram, figure 613 on page 310, there's clearly a serial interface connection between those 2. So if I come down here to the lightning bolt for connections, and if I'm looking for the serial connection, there's coax, DCE, so we'll choose DTE, and let's see if this works. So I'll click here, we'll go serial 000, and I'll connect that to this router here, serial 000. And let's see what happens. I'll try to straighten this drawing out a little bit, and we'll leave it right there. All right. So as you can see, both ends are red. We have no connectivity. So let's go ahead and do the configuration for this router. We'll go from user exec into privilege exec, and I'm going to go into the global config mode, where I'm then going to go into interface, serial 000, right? So now I'm in that interface configuration mode. So if I type no shut, we'd like to bring that interface up, and I'm going to go ahead and apply an IP address. And as you can see, the IP address is 209.165.200, and it's a /30, so I'll be 225 on this side, so a /30 would be 255.255.255.252. And so that's a /30, and I'll put a little description on here, and we'll put down WAN interface to router 2. All right, and so then I'll type end. So if I do a show IP interface, show IP interface, right? We're going to get all kinds of information here, but we want to see show IP interface brief. And this is a command that we've used a couple of times, gives us a lot of great information. So you can see that the interface is configured. There's the IP address that's been assigned, but it shows down and down. So we're going to take a look at that in a second. So now let's come over here to router 2. So if I double click on router 2, we're already in privilege exec mode. Now I'm going to go into global configuration mode and then into interface configuration mode. And again, it's the same interface on this side as it is over on the router 1 side. And so what I'm going to do is we'll do the no shut to bring the interface up, type in the IP address, and this is going to be 209.165.200, and this guy is .226. And again, the subnet mask is 255.255.255.252, and we'll put a description on this guy as well. We'll say WAN interface to router 1. And I can see that it still says router for the host name, so we'll add the host name in here and we'll call this router 2. There we go. So I'll do an end, type write mem to save my configuration. I'll do the same thing over here. So let's go into global config mode, get the host name set to router 1, and then do an end and a write mem. All right. So those commands have been run. The interfaces, the serial interfaces have been configured. Let me scoot over here a little bit. I'm going to try to, yeah, so as you can see, both interfaces are now green, right? So it appears that our link is up. So let's check and see if the show IP interfaces brief gives us some additional output right now. So I should be able to hit the up arrow to recall my previous commands. And so let's see what we've got here. All right, so serial 000 has been configured with that IP address, 209.165.200.225, and we appear to be in the up state. So can I ping 209.165.200.226? Because that's the interface on the other side of the link. And sure enough, we've got success. It works great. So I'm going to close that out. Let's pull up router 2. So again, if I do a show IP interface brief, all right, our interface is up and up. It shows it's configured. And so now let me see if I can ping 209.165.200.225. And sure enough, it works. So we have connectivity now between these two routers. So let's go ahead, let's build on this configuration and finish out what we've started here. Okay, so I'm going to add in some layer 2 switches. So we'll pull some 2960. So we're going to put one 2960 here. And this is again going to copy the image, the figure from 213, 2960, and then a 2960 here. Okay, so now we want to connect these switches to their respective routers. And so let's come back to the Connections tab. And if you remember, the crossover cable as well as the straight through cable, depending on the model of router, could work for you. So let's check and see. Let's go ahead and just use a straight through cable. So I'm going to go ahead and click here, and we'll choose gigabit 11. Let's see if this works. We'll try to connect it to gigabit 01. All right, so the link is red right now. So let's see if this link is going to come up. And it may or may not come up. So let's try a crossover cable and see what happens. So again, we'll come down to gigabit 11, and we'll connect that into gigabit 02. And so again, that link is red as well. But let's go in here and do some configuration and see what happens. And this is also a good example so that you can figure out your cable types. So I'll go into global config mode, and then I'm going to go into interface config mode, and I'm going to go on or into interface gig 00, which is one of the interfaces we connected to. So let's mouse over. Oops, let's mouse over here. Oh, we're not getting any activity. So I'll go ahead and configure that interface. I'll type no shut. Now it says it's changed the state to up. And so now if we pull up the 2960 router, and remember over here we ended up plugging into, and come back over and mouse over, should have been gigabit 11 up, so 11 and 02. So let me bring 02 up here, so I can go interface GI 0/2, and then whoops, no shut there. All right, so now that line has gone green. And in about 30 seconds, we should see the switch port also go green. Let me come back here. See what interface we're on here. That's gig 01, and this is to gig 11. So let me make sure I go into gig 01 and do a no shut. All right, change status to up, or state to up. All right, so those are green now, and so let's see what happens here. Aha. So after spanning tree converged, this link is now green. So we have connectivity between these two links. And let's see, in about 5 or 10 more seconds, we should have connectivity here on that link. So we have some configuration work that we need to do on router 1. So in looking at the book, you can see that the gig 02 interface, and we actually chose 02. As you can see here on the router at 02, the book shows 00, but we'll go ahead and use 02. So if I click there, I'm going to go into int gi0/2, and we've already done the no shut, and it looks like the IP address that's been assigned is going to be a 192.168.10.1, and it's a /24, which is 255.255.255.0. And the description will be LAN interface for 192.168.10.0/24. All right, so we have that entry made now on router 1, and that connects out to this switch here. And so then let's come back and take a quick look at what I believe is gig interface 01, and it is. It's gig interface 01. So we'll pull the router back up, the CLI for that router. We'll go into interface gig 01. We've already done the no shut, but now we need to assign an IP address. So it'll be IP address, and it's going to be 192.168.11.1, and again 255.255.255.0. We'll put a description on this so that we can see when we look at the running configuration, we'll have an idea as to what exactly this interface has been configured for. 192.168.11.0/24. All right, so that should do it for our router configuration. So if I type in and then write mem, which is the same as copy running configuration to startup configuration, when I run the show run command, let's take a look here. So there we go. So 01, and you can see our description is in there. 02 has been configured, and the serial interface has been configured. Okay, so router 1 has been fully configured on this side. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add in some PCs. So let's go ahead and add in a, we'll go ahead and add in a generic PC here, and we'll add in a generic PC here. Again, trying to mimic the configuration from the book. I'm going to connect these guys in, and so we're going to go ahead and take a straight through cable from the PC fast Ethernet into, and we'll just do fast Ethernet 01, and then we'll do the same thing again for this PC up here. Fast Ethernet into fast Ethernet 01. All right, so my lines are a little off there. Try to straighten those guys out. Okay, so right now we have the orange lights, but that's okay because we know that spanning tree is going to converge, and we should get a green link light here. So while that's working, I'm going to come up here to the first PC, which we're going to go ahead and rename. Whoops, call that guy back up. We're going to rename this guy PC1, but before we do that, we're going to give him a static IP address. And so he's going to be 192.168.10.10. And it automatically fills in the default, or I'm sorry, the subnet mask. And then our default gateway, and this is key because these are the interfaces that we had configured on router 1. So this interface here, which is going to be the 192.168.10.1, right? That is our default gateway address. So any packets that we have that will not be delivered locally are going to be sent to the default gateway, right? Or our default route for the host. And so that default gateway is going to be 192.168.10.1. And we have no DNS server, and so that's okay. Let me go ahead and close that out. We have the IP configuration on there, and let's pull up the command prompt. So from the command prompt, we should probably check to see, can we ping our default gateway, which is 192.168.10.1. And so I'll hit enter, and we have success. Now, do you think that I could ping across and ping the router on the other side? So if I were to ping 209, first let's see if we can ping the outside interface of the router on our side of the drawing, router 1. So that was 209.165.200.225. And let's see what happens. And sure enough, that works. So it's not going to let me clear my screen, so let me pull this, slide it back up a little bit. There we go. So now let's see if we can ping across the WAN link to 209.165.200.226 and see if that works. And interestingly enough, that does not work right now. If you remember, we haven't actually added in any routing to assist this in working. And we do have to do some configuration still over on router 2. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm going to close this down. Right, so we've got it configured. This PC here, right, has been configured, and he can ping this interface on the inside, which is his default gateway, and he can also ping the outside interface on this router, but he cannot ping across to the other router. All right. And so I'm going to change the name of this guy to PC1. And I don't know if that's going to allow me to do it. Yeah, so it looks like I'll do PC01. Okay. So PC01. And this guy, we'll come over and configure this guy. We'll call him PC02. And he's going to have a static configuration as well. And so from looking at the drawing, he's 192.168.11.10, and it automatically fills in with a /24, 255.255.255.0. And the default gateway for this guy is going to be 192.168.11.1, keeping in mind that the reason the default gateway is different than the other host is that we're depending on a different interface on this router to be our default gateway. And if you remember, we configured this one with the 192.168.11, and the one on the top was 192.168.10. And so let's come over to the command prompt, and let's try some pings. So can I ping 192.168.11.1, which is my default gateway? Sure enough, I can. And let's see if I can ping the outside interface, the 209.165.200.225. And I can. And now let's check and see if this PC can ping across, and he should not be able to. The 209.165.200.226. And again, just like PC1, PC2 is unable to ping across the WAN link. And so we're going to take a look at that here in a second as we transition over to the other side of our drawing. All right, so we've got good connectivity there. Let me close that down, and we'll close this guy down. And so as you can see over here, we haven't hooked our switches up yet, and we still have router 2. So let's take a look inside router 2, make sure we've configured everything so far. And I'll go from user exec into privilege exec. Whoops. And so we'll do a show run from privilege exec. See what we've got here. So this guy's got the 3 gigabit Ethernet interfaces. The serial link has been configured. All right, and that is about it right now. And again, if I do the show IP route, you'll remember from the reading that since we're running 15.x or 15.1, I say .x is a generic, it could be 15.1, .2, .3. So we're running the universal code, and remember, it'll show a connected, and then it'll show a host or a /32, which is a host route, locally connected when you do the show IP route. So for the 209.165.200.0, right, it says it's subnetted, and we haven't talked about subnetting yet, but we will. But just know that it shows me a connected route because we're directly connected and out that interface. And then it also shows a host route, which is actually a route for that specific interface. But I'm not advertising any of my 192.168 routes yet. Okay, so we'll keep things consistent, like we did on the other side, and I'm going to go ahead and go into interface GI 0/1, and from looking at the drawing, we'll make that the 10.1.1 up on the top, so that gig 01 on the top matches the other one. So change the state to up. So I'm going to assign an IP address of 10.1.1, oops, .1.1.1. So it's 10.1.1.1, and that's the default gateway address. It's a /24. All right, and we'll put a description on this interface as well. And we'll say that this is a LAN interface for 10.1.1.0/24. And we'll hit enter. And then we'll go over to interface gigabit 02. We'll do a no shut. Tells us the interface state's changed to up. We'll put in the IP address. And this guy is going to be 10.1.2.1. And again, /24, 255.255.255.0. And a key takeaway here is remember that a 10 dot, that's a class A address. But we've applied a class C subnet mask. However, remember that that does not change the class of this address. The class of the address is dictated off of the value in the first octet. So this will always be a class A address. It's simply that we have applied a class C subnet. But again, that is still a class A address. That will always be a class A address. Okay, so we'll add that in there. We'll put the description in there, and we'll say LAN interface 2 or 4 and 10.1.2.0/24. All right, so we've configured those interfaces. We've brought them up. I'll type end. We'll type write mem to save our configuration. And let's do a quick show run. And you can see there's gig 01 and gig 02. And so everything looks good. Okay, so let me come over here. And as you can see, our crossover cable and the straight through worked. So we'll just stay consistent here. We'll go, whoops, we'll say gig 11, and this is going to come to gig 02. And that same connection here with the straight through, and this guy's going to be gig 01, or I'm sorry, gig 11 to gig 01. All right, so they're still orange, but we know that those are going to change to green for us here shortly. So let's bring out some generic PCs while we're at it. So I'll just add the PC. And I highly recommend that when you see diagrams in the book that you attempt the same thing. Try to set the topology up so that it mimics the topology in the book, and these are great ways to practice. All right, so I'll come back here. We'll connect the PCs in. So fast Ethernet's going to come into fast Ethernet 01. And then this interface is going to come over here. Fast Ethernet is going to connect into fast Ethernet 01. So we're green over here, and spanning tree is going to converge. It's going to go through the listening and the learning states, and then it's going to come up. So while that's doing that, on this side over here, we'll go ahead and we'll configure the PC. All right, so we're going to make it PC, and I'll just keep it consistent, 03. Come to the desktop. IP address will stay static, and so this guy is going to be 10.1.1. And it looks like 10. Now, you'll notice that before we used the 192 addresses, it gave us the default subnet mask for that class of address. So a 192.168, that is a class C address. And so that's why it gave us the default subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. However, here we're presented with the default subnet mask for a class A address, which is simply 255.0.0.0. However, we know that we want this subnetted, so we'll do 255.255.255.0, and our default gateway is going to be the 10.1.1.1, remembering that that's the address we assigned on the router 2, that's connected into the switch that this PC is connected into. So let's shut that down, and we'll pull the command prompt up, and let's check. Because you always want to check to make sure that you have connectivity, and certainly we do have connectivity to our default gateway. So this guy looks great. So we'll go ahead and shut this down. As you can see, our links are now up and operational. We'll go ahead and change PC2. We'll make this guy PC04. And we'll come here to the desktop. We'll do the IP configuration. So it's going to be 10.1.2.10. And again, we're presented with the default subnet mask for a Class A address. However, we're using a Class C subnet mask here. And I'll go 10.1.2.1 is our default gateway. So let me close this down. I'll pull up the command prompt, and let's see if we can ping 10.1.2.1. And sure enough, we have connectivity, right? So that's working great. Now, actually from PC2, let me see if I can ping the outside interface of router 2. We'll do the same thing that we did over here when we were configuring router 1. So if I try to ping 209.165.200.226, we would expect that that's going to work because that's this interface right here. So it's still on the same router that is serving as our default gateway. But now let me try to ping 225 and let's see if that works. So as we would expect, and just like we experienced over on the router 1 side, we do not have connectivity. All right, so let's close this guy down. So obviously, at least in this scenario, what we would like is for this PC to be able to contact these PCs over here, right? As well as these PCs on this side being able to communicate with these PCs over here on this side. Now, this is going to require we can set up a default route, and we can also set up a routing protocol to do this. But for right now, let's just go ahead and set up a default route. So let's take a look at this router and see what we've got on here when we do the command. So I'll go into privilege exec mode. If I do a show IP route, you can see that I've got some connected and learned, right? Because again, this is running the 15.x branch of code. And I have it for each of the 3 subnets that I'm currently configured for. And again, remember, we configured these addresses, the 192.168.10.1, 11.1, and then the WAN interface. We manually configured those. So those all exist. Now, what's interesting is the gateway of last resort is not set. And so this router does not have a default gateway set up. So we can set up a default route and we can make it, and we're on router 1 right now. So what we're going to say is if router 1 receives a packet and it doesn't know where it's supposed to go, we'll have it send it over here to router number 2. So if I'll go into global configuration mode, and we'll do IP route 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0, and then my next hop. Now I could put the interface in there, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the IP address in there. So the 209.165.200.226. And so that's this interface on router 2, which is across from router 1. So let me type in enter. We'll do an end. I'm going to save my configuration. And now when I do show IP route, you can see that the gateway of last resort is this IP address, which is on router number 2, and so that is my default route. So if my router 1 on this side, receives a packet and it doesn't know where to send that packet, it's going to send it, and you can see here we have the static entry, right? And the asterisk says it's a candidate default, and right now that's our only default route, over to 209.165.200.226. All right, so let me switch over to here. And now we've got the default route here. So let me come over to PC1. Whoops, let's come to PC1 and see what happens. If I go to the desktop, the command prompt, and I'll type in ping 209.165.200.226. So I'm going to try to ping across, and let's see what happens. And it's still not working, right? Because there's some things that we need to do, we still need to do over on not only for the routing for the subnets, but also for the router on the other side of this link. So that's timing out. So we'll close this down. So let's come over here to router number 2, and we're going to set router number 2's default gateway up as well. So if I do go into global configuration mode, and I'm going to type in IP route, and again this is the 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0, and this guy's going to go to 209.165.200.225. Whoops. 225. And so that will be our default route. If I do a question mark at the end, you can see I can change the metric for the route, but we're just going to leave it as its default. So I'll type in end, and then we'll do not show run, show IP route. And as you can see, gateway of last resort has been set. And so here are the networks on my side of the link, and again, there is my default route setting. All right, so let's see. Can I ping from this PC across to the other router now? 209.165.200.225. Aha! So now I can ping across. So let's see if from this side I can, from this side I can ping over to 226. And it works. So the takeaway here for this portion of the tutorial is that those default routes are required on both sides of the link. So that way the packets know not only how to get there, but then also how to find their way back. All right, so what we've done is we've been able to set up, actually, I guess one last test that we'll do is we'll ping down from PC1 to PC2. So let me go ahead and ping 192.168.11.10, and let's see if that connectivity's there and it works. And it does. All right. And then let me see if I can ping from PC4. Whoops. We'll ping from PC4 to PC3. So if I ping 10.1.1.10, and sure enough, it works. So this PC can now ping this PC, right? Okay. So again, this is a great way to get some experience with configuring networks. And you'll notice we didn't do any work with routing protocols. That's a little outside of where we're at right now in our course. But again, the key takeaway here is looking at that image that's in the book, this is a fantastic way to get some experience actually configuring an entire network setup. We got to configure 2 routers, 4 PCs, and configure connectivity between those devices. And so hopefully you find this tutorial helpful, and I highly recommend that you watch this video and then try to set up the same configuration, the same topology, logical topology, and then make those configurations. Okay, again, this is for CSI157 Section 841 students at Anne Arundel Community College for the spring 2014 semester, and I will see all of you on Tuesday night. Have a great evening.